Hey, welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. I was done for the week, I thought, but something came up on social today and it's lit up pretty quickly. Lots of comments, lots of notes, and I'll read it to you and just let you know, just because I'm reading it to you doesn't mean I agree with it. I'm just saying that this is what it says. So this one's on Reddit. I don't really go on Reddit like ever, but somebody sent this to me. Another pharmacy school decides to profit off of students, compete with their alumni. Publicly traded companies made a business out of contracting with colleges of pharmacy, setting up student-run call centers, etc., etc., etc. So you can find the actual post. But a lot of the things it says are not necessarily, well, let's just say it's certainly one-sided. So let me kind of go into my own experience because I did work in a call center, and I loved it, to be honest. But let me talk a little bit about it. So this was so it would have been just before I came back to Maryland. So it would have been about 4 years after I graduated from pharmacy school in '97, and I worked for mail order pharmacy. And there were some issues that the patients were waiting on hold too long, and they started pulling us from the line to work the phones. And I literally was on a factory line, like a little conveyor belt went by me. I checked the prescription. After I checked the prescription, it went back on the line, and I loved it because I had worked for 3 or 4 years in retail. And again, I things were a little bit different back then in retail. I mean, you're talking almost 22 years. And uh, I'd switched from a company where I'd managed the pharmacy, and I just wanted something that was just kind of, I just wanted some consistency in my life. I wanted to be around other people, and I loved mail order. And my hours were, I think it was 7 to 3:30 if I remember right. And we would get two 15-minute breaks. And I remember going to the first break, and it was just so strange to talk to another pharmacist on break. So just take a second to think about that. Now, maybe you in hospital or long-term care or other academia, wherever you are, maybe that's not a big thing for you. But as a retail pharmacist, to actually go to lunch with another pharmacist or to go to a break with another pharmacist and then lunch with other pharmacists, and it was cool. We had tables, and so you've got a bunch of people that are have a lot in common. That the line would shut down for half an hour, then we'd come back on, and I loved it. And that was mail order, and that was first of all how I felt about it. And I ended up coming home back to Maryland from Arizona, not because of the job. I actually loved it. It was just time for me to go. Those of you that live in Arizona know that there are very few Arizonans in Arizona, and for whatever reason, it was just kind of time, and I wanted to be home for a while, so I picked back up and went back to retail as a staff in a very busy store up in Baltimore. But going back to the call center experience, I remember it was a very different call center experience because our calls were incoming, not outgoing. And I just answered phone calls from people who had questions. So I loved it. I mean, I'm an extrovert. So in some ways, being on the line was a little tough for me because I didn't get to talk to people while I was checking prescriptions, but I got to talk with people, 15-minute break and half-hour lunch and then 15-minute break again. And so, I got enough, but this was great. I got to do like call center, sometimes half the day, sometimes the whole day. And I was answering patient questions and able to solve different problems. And I started to get to know people on the other side. Then I would, start talking to the techs like, hey, can we get this package out? Something happened with the insulin. It's, wasn't cold enough and things like that. And it was problem solving and things like that. And there was just, I don't know, there was no shame in it. I loved it. I thought it was great. But what this rant is saying that there's relationships between the schools of pharmacy and these companies, and somehow the company would profit if that was an APPE. But if you read the comments, though, it sounds like these students are getting paid, and it was up to $21 an hour, I think, for a P4 who was working in one of these. So I don't know. I don't. I get the point of the person. The person is like, well, how can someone who's in business in a pharmacy, compete with a company that's using labor that is free? But what I keep seeing from the comments is that the number of IPPE and APPE students that work there isn't that well. I couldn't tell if it was mandatory or things like that, but the only mandatory one I saw was drug information, and they were doing research and things like that, so I understand that. And then the rant says something that I felt was pretty false, though. It said schools push them to go into the APPEs, and I don't see that being true. I don't know if it's true of IPPEs because we didn't really have IPPEs back then. Like, we already worked in pharmacies. Like, what's the point of an IPPE? But it's saying we push them into the call centers, and APPEs have always been something that you get to choose. And it's never been, okay, well, we need to have this call center staff, so we need to have these 6 students go there. It's always been the other way around. It's always been the students who are doing it. So anytime someone's angry, I always try to understand what they're really upset about. And what I think the real thing that they're upset about is that if students are working at one place and they're working for free, then there's no way that someone's in a similar industry can compete against that. And what the rant did do was have a pretty good analogy where they talk about, like, well, what if an MBA or business school opened up a for-profit tax filing service staffed by the students in the MBA and started taking business away from the alumni who were, accountants and things like that. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on it, but I think the rant goes way too far to one side and doesn't really show both sides. And I think the comments really do a good job to temper it. But I get it, the whole thing with pharmacists as, becoming clinicians and, the white coat and all of that stuff doesn't jive with a picture of somebody, and somebody had said this in the comments, doesn't jive with the picture of the headset when you go over to the link. So anyway, be curious to hear what you say, but my personal opinion was that a position where I could work, now this was as a pharmacist, where I could work as a pharmacist and have hours from 7 to 3:30, 5 days a week, get to actually spend quality time with other humans during my breaks and lunch. That was a pretty satisfying life, and I really liked it. But be curious to hear what you guys have to say. Hey, thanks for listening to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast. And if you're interested in learning more about the interview process, go over to Amazon.com where you can check out 100 strong residency interview questions, answers, and rationales in print book, ebook, and audiobook.